Hi there. This is my narration of the slides that I presented on LinkedIn a while back. Nothing incredibly groundbreaking here, but I thought I'm doing some research on artificial intelligence and the consulting industry, hopefully finishing a book on it next year. These are just some high-level insights for people that perhaps don't know what's going on in the world of AI or have focused specifically on LLMs. So let's have a look. So, what's occurring, as they say in Wales? So the first thing to say is that there's a huge amount of fuss at the moment about LLMs. So Bard, ChatGPT, and things like that. These are great large language models that, in effect, are auto-completion bots. They look for the most likely word that comes next in a series of words. They read and generate accurate human-like text. So these are great for things like, well, I say they're great. Actually, most of them aren't. But they will be better for customer support. I've heard of several companies getting rid of their customer support by, cutting numbers by 90% and putting in LLMs, then customers complaining, and then them having to get them back. The interesting thing about LLMs is that you can train them on your own data. So you can bias them towards the types of words that you use in your company, and you can upload PDFs and docs, etc. for it to learn not just your style of talking, but also content from your own company. Takes a little bit of work, but there we go. But my key point here is that there's a whole load of other AIs which are important to know about. So one of them is expert systems. Expert systems mimic humans. You can either program in rules or you can teach them rules from a set of data. A good example of this is that expert systems are now better at diagnosing cancer from scans than doctors or oncologists are. I'll run through these quite quickly. I think they're relatively straightforward. Machine learning, so that's where you've got piles and piles of data and you use it to make decisions or predictions about the future. Sometimes those decisions are based on predictions about the future. This is used a lot in several things, but one of them is fraud prevention. You can predict what customers are likely to do, or fraudsters are likely to do based upon their actions, a series of actions. And that might be, how long they spend entering data. It might be how long they spend on a web page. Deep learning uses something called neural networks. I'm not going to go into that now. Perhaps that's a session for another time. I guess the technical details of this don't matter a huge amount. It's the business implementation and effects that are important. That's learning from large data sets to provide indications. So the most obvious versions of this are content recommendations or shopping recommendations. When you go on Amazon, you buy a dishwasher and then for the next 6 months you'll advertise dishwashers. So obviously there's a long way to go with some of these. There's a whole load of AI that fits loosely under computer vision. This in effect is very good at recognizing things, and those things can range from you can tell image generators to find you a picture like the one you were showing it or uploading to it. Amazon Go, for example, is a shop where in effect you don't check out, at least to a person or to a visible machine. It tracks what you're doing, it tracks what you're picking up, and it charges you automatically when you leave the shop. And finally, natural language processing, which is actually a step, to be honest, within the LLM training system. But that's very good at interpreting and analysing text. And so what you get here is a lot of companies scraping data from the internet and then using that to generate analyses or insights into, for example, service improvements. I've used Expedia as an example here. This is from a few little surveys I've done. They had about 600 responses. About the key number here is 2/3. So consultants, do you use AI? 2/3 of them do. What do you use AI for? Well, about 2/3 of them use it to save time. That 22%, when I dug into the qualitative data, those were consultants that were actually using it in software or products at the moment. With clients, so they weren't developing new services and products. I'll run this one again using more detailed specification of the answers. Interesting one here. Who knows you're using AI? And this was targeted at consultants, not senior consultants or partners. Another one, 60 odd percent are saying that no one senior knows that they're using AI in their job, which is really interesting. Number one, it's risk. Number two, it's potential untapped efficiencies. So if you're going to have policies on this, you need to enforce them. But secondly, if people are using it, ideally mechanisms for sharing best practice and perhaps rewarding some of that sharing. Some key observations. There's a lot of myths about AI. I started to put some down. There's a few more. Number one is that AI can't be creative. And now anyone that's used it will know that it can be creative. At least as creative as most humans are, which isn't particularly creative. But certainly with art, with text, with content generation, it can be quite creative. If you're struggling to create an agenda for a workshop, I would suggest writing down your own ideas and then using Bard or ChatGPT to give you ideas. I've spent 20 years studying the consulting industry, training it, advising people, and writing about the consulting industry, and I always get an oddball or curveball from using ChatGPT 4 in terms of some nice ideas. So yeah, if it works for me occasionally, it might work for you. So the first thing to say, and how do I phrase this? Consultants aren't being made redundant yet, and I believe they're probably not going to be made redundant. I'll talk about this in the next slide, I think. But IBM announced something recently where they were saying that they were pausing recruitment because AI is going to take over 8,000 jobs in the company. Now, the first thing to say is that these were back office jobs, sort of in human resources, which is quite ironic given the word human. But also, my insiders in IBM suggest that this actually would have happened anyway, regardless of IBM, because they're simply overstaffed and that the economy's not looking great at the moment. So I think a lot of the redundancies that are being blamed on IBM AI are very often focused on sort of back office rather than consultants. I haven't heard of any consultants being made redundant yet, although I think in a couple of years' time they will be. I believe that for every one junior consultant now you're going to need 0.5 in a couple of years' time, and perhaps even 0.25 in 5 years' time. There's a lot of fuss about the big firms. Now they're building their own LLMs from their, I think PwC said they were investing 200 million in AI, or it might have even been more than that. And I know that Bloomberg has built their own LLM for around 100 million, but typically this is out of reach for the smaller firms, but you can build your own chatbot by training it, and there's different ways of training it depending on your requirements for security and performance and access. My view is that the biggest opportunity now is efficiency. It's highly time saving. I don't think there's a huge amount of evidence to show that it improves client deliverables. In fact, I would say that if you're getting AI to write reports or proposals, you're actually lowering the quality that clients are getting. But I don't think I haven't heard of anyone doing that, but maybe they wouldn't admit it. So these are my top 10 tools. I'm not going to talk through them all, but I want to just give you a couple of highlights. Firstly, any of you that have people coding, I realise that's not really consultancy, but there's a lot of coding co-pilots now, which are really good. They give suggestions, they correct errors. They can write your code for you, but I wouldn't suggest that is the way to go at the moment. I would suggest using it as a sense checker. What else is interesting? Plus Docs. Have a look at Plus Docs. It's really interesting. Those of you that have to produce, say, monthly reports, either to your client or your senior management team, where you're in effect just updating data, you can take a screenshot of some data and paste it into a PowerPoint or paste it into a Word document, and it will continuously update that image. And so in effect, you're getting dynamic snapshots, which are going to save a vast amount of time. There's obviously stuff for slides and writing documents and all the rest of it. Cheat layer looks quite interesting for building automations. I've tried all of these plus probably another 100 or so. In my view, around 90% of AI software, new AI software, isn't very good. It's not really fit for purpose in my view, but there are exceptions. Get Cody is quite good. It's the best chatbot creator I've discovered. Although I'm actually going to build my own for the consulting industry, I think, because it doesn't really understand consulting phrases. Mockup is really interesting. You can draw a sketch of a dashboard and it will automatically create that dashboard and link up to the APIs for the data that you've got available. So there's a whole load of things here. I'm not going to go through them all, but yeah, some of them very interesting. 3 predictions. Now, I'm not necessarily sure I should be listening to predictions for predictions, because I called Trump wrong, I called Brexit wrong, and I called Boris Johnson wrong, and I called the war. I never thought that Putin would be foolish enough to go into Ukraine, but there we are. Perhaps he shouldn't have, and perhaps all of those bad decisions. But there we go. So number one, I would say that consultancy is going to be much less impacted than other professional services. My reason for that is almost philosophical, but I think it's true. In that organizations exist in they're highly open environments. They're highly open to influence. So that is why, if the client has a problem around, I don't know, supply chain costs, every consultancy is going to have a different method, a different approach, and perhaps a different answer to this. Now, that doesn't happen in a lot of professional services. The law, for example, is a highly closed entity. It can't be changed easily, and when it is changed, it's changed in a very fixed way. There's a set number of words, and so interpretation of that is quite an easy thing to do. And if you want to create a new contract or a new contract for selling your house or whatever, it's a relatively straightforward thing to do. Consultancy isn't, and part of that openness is the personal interests and personalities of buyers, who, number one, buy on relationships. Number two, have their own preferences as to whether they're introverts, extroverts, they prefer data-driven approaches or they prefer people-driven approaches, what they have been trained in themselves. And so, don't get me wrong, I do think at the bottom layer of, and perhaps even the middle management layer of consulting, there are going to be redundancies made. I don't think it's going to decimate consultancy in the same way that has happened in law, etc. Number two, there's been a huge amount of change, especially around LLMs in the last 6 months, and everyone's getting very excited about this. But I would say that actually to implement any of this stuff isn't as simple as just signing up to a website. If you're a credible consultancy, there need to be security restrictions, there need to be hacking restrictions, there need to be access restrictions, you need policies around it, and you're not just going to go with Joe Blogs, so there's a whole thing about trust and credibility, as well as the policy side things, that I think are going to slow the implementation rather than the creation of technical wizardry down. And history kind of agrees with that. Even cloud computing or mobile banking, although it was there, it didn't catch on immediately. One of my major projects as a corporate consultant was 3G products and services. And, some of the stuff we were talking about 15 years ago is only just coming into into actually happening now. And that's partly because the technology has improved and allows that, and so the costs have gone down, but it's also partly because there's a maturity curve of consumers. So people only use these things when they are psychologically ready for it. Anyway, the third thing is a bit more fun. I've got about 10 predictions, but I want to save some of them for the books. I think there's going to be consulting avatars, especially of gurus. So there is, especially if that person has recorded a lot of their material. And I would encourage you, if you're heading up to partner level, I would encourage you to record everything you can. if you've recorded a lot of material, your meetings, your conversations, insofar as ethics and the law allow, sorry, I just closed the window because there was a big bee coming in. Yes, then there's enough data plus everything you've written and the reports you've done, etc., to train a bot in your style and in your way of thinking. If you add that to ChatGPT generally, you've got a fairly powerful, insightful entity. You can also add that now, and this technology is there now, you can add that to a video of yourself actually speaking the words that the chatbot is putting out. Now, this is all a little bit clunky at the moment. I have no doubt within a year the technology will be relatively flawless in doing this. But this will allow, in effect, senior partners with an expertise in X to hire out access to a virtual avatar of themselves to clients to give advice, perhaps when that partner is asleep, or even to juniors in terms of how to do things and why to do things and where to go. And I think perhaps the licensing for that is going to be much more impactful on revenue than even the day rates of someone like Drucker or Christensen. There we go. Okay, I hope that was useful. It's just a few insights relatively quickly. Take care. Bye-bye.